to introduce our shepherd, Bishop Gregory. I pass the microphone to him so he can introduce our speaker.
All right, so first introducing the topic. The topic is fascinating, especially since our Maronite Church made a deliberate decision a few years ago to include more saints. We have no idea who the heck they are. That's why Father Claude has been our ace in the hole to figure out what is it. Father Claude did his STL, SEOL, at the Orientalium in Rome, which is the heartbeat of the Eastern Catholic and Orthodox churches. Patriarchs and bishops and priests have graduated from there. And Father Claude was stellar in his class, and he's still stellar. And Father Claude has a passion for these things. He has a passion for all things Maronite. And he has a passion to go after any inauthenticity he sees in the Maronite Catholic Church. So if you're faking it, you're not going to watch out with Father Claude. He wants to see authentic and true Maronite tradition come forward. So, and he's worked very, very well with Father Elias Havel and Monsignor Michael Thomas to do our calendar now every year. So it's pretty much in his hands to do that kind of work. So I look forward to this. The subdeacon has been helping you. Oh, that's right. Subdeacon Norbert. Thank you. Subdeacon Norbert takes care of all of our website, our parochial website. So thank you, Subdeacon Norbert. He's the one dressed like a subdeacon. Okay, so without any further ado, thank you, Father Claude, and thank you, everybody here at the Maronite Seminary for hosting this seminar. We look forward to eating up everything that we can from your presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sayedna. You made my talk sound way more exciting than it's going to be. This is going to be sleepy time with Father Claude. Well, the material itself is going to be a little probably dry. I'm going to try and make it as happy and exciting as possible. Hopefully you'll find it exciting. I do, but like the professor said yesterday, sometimes what you find exciting, others were like, well, why are you even studying that, So, with that, first I just want to say a couple of thank yous before I begin. I want to thank Monsignor Peter Azar and Father Armando Khoury for hosting this event and for inviting me. Last summer I was passing through. I stayed overnight here at the seminary going to visit my family, and they were like, oh, you working on anything lately? And I'm like, well, I've been doing a comparison of the Maronite calendars, and I explained a little bit, and so then they contacted me and asked if I would give a presentation on it, so here I am. And I'd like to thank also Bishops Gregory and Elias for supporting these events like this, because it makes it important for the clergy and laity to learn more about our heritage and tradition. We always need to be learning. In a special way, I do want to thank the Bishop Gregory for his constant support for me in doing this, and he does it in not only just go get 'em kind of ways, but last summer I received in the mail this heavy book. He goes with a little note asking, would you find this helpful? And yes, because it's Synaxarian and Arabic. It's, to my knowledge, it's the latest edition that was printed from Shewin in 2015. We'll get to this in the presentation, but I just wanted to point that out. And also, Monsignor George Sabali, when I was down here in the summer, we were talking about this, and I have a digital copy of the Catholic 1967 or 69. The date will be here at some point. Synaxarion that was done by Father Paul Daher, and but Monsignor George gave me the 1996 edition, so a little bit more updated. So I appreciate him giving me that as well. And so when we talk about the sanctoral calendar, does everybody know what I'm talking about? No? Okay, good. I want to know because if I need to talk about it. So sanctoral calendar, essentially when we talk about the church calendar, there's two calendars. There's the sanctoral calendar, which is the saints, and the feasts of our Lord and the feasts of Our Lady. And then there would be the temporal or seasonal calendar. So, you know, if you go to a Maronite church, you have the season of announcement, which leads up to the Nativity. You have the season of Epiphany, etc. Now, sometimes these will cross over because the season of announcement leads up to a sanctoral feast of the Nativity of Christ. Then you have the opposite situation for Epiphany. The Epiphany, which is on the sanctoral calendar, begins a season of the Epiphany. So there's things like that. So when we talk about the sanctoral calendar, we're talking about the commemoration of the saints and feasts, major feasts of our Lord and feasts of Our Lady. Okay, so that's clear, right? So how did I get into this project? Well, it actually started out just kind of simply. I started texting some priest friends and some parishioners based off of our previous calendars, like these photo calendars that eparchy does. But I noticed there was there would be a day and then we'd have like 5 blanks, and then there'd be another day and then it'd be 3 or 4 blanks, and then you'd have like 2-3 days in a row you have a saint, and then there's blanks. I'm like, we got to have more than this. And then I remembered about 20 years or over 20 years ago, I was lucky to obtain the Pentology series. I see we have the whole collection in Bishop Dwight's over there, which I have the whole one. I only brought the one volume. In this one volume, there was a comparison of some Maronite calendars, and I never really looked at it in detail, and I said, well, let me start looking at this. And of course, it's in French, so I said, well, I'm going to just type it up in columns in English, so Jean becomes John, that kind of a thing. Well, before long, get this one here.
Pierre becomes what?
Pierre becomes Pierre. No. Oops. Got to go the right way. Okay. So before long, it became like this. Okay. So right now I have like 12 columns, and since I started this, I've also gotten some new sources, so it's probably going to get even bigger and getting smaller. So what I've started doing is I put footnotes if I have things, and put different notes. But I'm doing it like this so I can compare who the saint is. So for example, in this example of June the 1st, one of the calendars has the feast of the ears, meaning like the wheat ears, but all the rest have like Justin Martyr across the board. So but then you're going to have days where some calendars have some saints and some have other different saints. Yes, yeah, but I got to go back now because it's a long story. But some of the sources I had, I didn't realize that there was another section where it had even more of the saints. So I got to fill in some more blanks here. But the problem is, you know, as you keep expanding, you keep learning more and more, and I'm trying to get this basically corrected, because I just wanted to see where our calendar came from, because then I discovered there was a list from our patriarchate in Turkey, and that's what this little book is. Talk about when you struggle with Arabic and it's in microscopic writing. It makes it real fun. Again, thank you, Sayedna, for sending me that. Okay. I scanned it in and made it really big. But yeah, they sent. But there are errors, like today, where somebody misread Yasun, which is supposed to be Jason, as Yahana, as John. So we have an error on our American calendar because they made an error in Lebanon, and we need to correct ours, but they also need to correct theirs, and that's a whole nother debate of whether that'll happen.
They mixed it because they added the Italian Gian Marie something, you know, that's why they combined the two with the third Genie something.
No, I think it's they misread. They didn't know the name Yasun. Okay, so anyways, when we talk about things for the calendar, there's some terminology we need to define. Okay, so the last couple days, the professor, she was talking about hagiography. Right, so hagiography, as she explained, was the lives of the saints. It literally means hagio in Greek, meaning holy, graphia, to write. So writing of the holy people. The writing the lives of the holy people. And then there's the typicon. Now sometimes we think of typicon like the sisters or the monks will have a typicon for their monastic life. But in this case, the typicon was in the Byzantine tradition, it would have sometimes about a saint, but in particular, I have this one here, which has, and I'll have a page up there in a minute, but it has Greek and then the French translation on the other page of a very old manuscript. And other than just having the saint, it'll sometimes say, you know, the saint of such and such city, but then they go on to say, you know, morning prayer is done at this church. They give directions. Then they process over for this martyr. And then, so they give like directions of how to celebrate and where the celebration is to be done. So that's what a typicon is. So it's a liturgical book that gives directions.
Rubric
Like a rubric book, but even like more, in a sense. Like an ordo type book, but it's a little bit more deep. Now, some of these terms I'm going to be using, I'm going to use them in a specific way, but sometimes you read in one document, they're using one term, and in another document they use another term. So then the next word is the minologion. Minologion is a long form life of the saints. So this would be like the stories that the professor was talking about today, where somebody wrote, you know, the long thing about Febronia, okay? And so this would be, this would cover for all the months and days of the year for each month. And the most important collection of this was done by a man named Simeon Metaphrastus, which is that's sort of his nickname, is the last word, Metaphrastus. He's actually on our calendar. Because meta, meaning changing, phrasis, phrases, because he changed the words. He took the stories he got and he changed words and like improved them. So he was famous for this. He lived around 1000. Then the next word, of course, we we know in the Arabic form often as the Synaxar. It's a Greek word, Synaxarion. And this is a short form of the lives of the saints. So the Menologion is the long one, and then they're like, well, we'll summarize it in a small form, and that's what the Synaxarion essentially is. And then you have the Martyrologion, which, or martyrology, and this is typically the lives of the saints that's found in the Latin church. It's not a detailed life of the saints, but it's usually, it's sort of a list, but it'll be like a list, so-and-so, Saint so-and-so, who died by stoning in the city of, Antioch. And that's it. It's not just Saint so-and-so the martyr, but they'll give you maybe a little detail of how they died, but beyond that, it's not very detailed. So that's the nearest equivalent in the East to the Eastern Church's Synaxarion. So does that all make sense?
I thought those are about the martyrs. It seems I was wrong.
Huh?
It's
I
about
thought it was only
martyrs.
about martyrs.
Well, primarily, but later they would add other, like Francis of Assisi and things like that. But it's mostly the martyrs because the early church was mostly, in fact, I have one 93-year-old lady who comes to daily liturgy, and every day I'll read like a little bit of who the saint of the day is, and she goes, oh, another martyr. Oh, I don't want to die like the martyrs. I'm like, yeah, well, most of the list is martyrs. So, sorry. Okay, so when I started doing this comparison of the Maronite calendars, I started discovering that, especially on some of the old manuscripts, you get things like, Saint John the Martyr or something like that. Well, it's like, well, who's that? Which John? Like, can you give me a little bit more? So I started discovering that obviously a lot of these saints are so early on that we share them between all the Eastern churches. And so if you look in other manuscripts, other traditions, on the same day you will find the same saint, but you might get something else to actually help identify who the person is. Doesn't always work, but it sometimes works. And so these are a few, this is just a list of a few of the sources that I've been utilizing. So here's the first one, is that Typicon I was talking about. So this is a 10th century document. Okay, so like here, this is on September the 1st. Oops, I keep hitting the wrong buttons. So it says Saint Simeon the Stylite, right? Okay, so we would have Saint Simeon on the same day. But notice, see how, because it's a Typicon, it has other information here. The synaxis is at the Theotokos. I can't read the whole thing, but it tells you. So you're going to do the synaxis prayers at the Church of the Theotokos of so and so, which is, they don't say like on 5th Street or whatever, but it'd be like that. They would know where that church is. So on that day, that's where you go and you celebrate that saint, and then you might process from there. It might tell you, and then you process to such and such church for the Eucharist part or something. It could be that elaborate depending on the saint. So, but this is a good source for comparing saints on our calendar to other calendars because it gives you information, and it's very early on, 10th century. The next, and these are all non-Maronite sources, okay? The next one is from the 11th century. There is a Muslim scholar named Biruni. I'm sure some of you have heard of him, al-Biruni. And he lived in like Persia area, modern day Iraq, Persia area. And he wrote a book where he compared all the different cultures there. The Muslims, the Jews that were living there, the various different Christians. And he listed their calendars and their feast days. And so This has a very old, yeah.
Why is put Melkite? Because it's confusing. The Melkite at that time as a church were not in existence.
Because they use the term Melkite in the old term of like meaning Chalcedonian. Okay, right. So that's why some of our sources will say Melkite, but it's we share them because they're Antiochean sources.
Byzantine, but because the Antiochean Greek, if I want to use it, or Byzantine Syria or something.
Yes, but in most of these documents, they're still, like when you look them up in catalogs in the Syriac manuscripts, they still call them Melkite manuscripts because they're using it from Malco, meaning king, meaning they were with the emperor. They supported Chalcedon and the emperor. So some of these are probably early on that we may have shared these texts. That's why we borrow some of the saints are the same on our calendars, but they were in possession of the Antiochean Orthodox or whatever. And that's what it would be, the Greek-speaking ones that would have been in Persia area, and I guess they probably started eventually speaking Arabic out there or whatever. But so this document also has feasts, but they don't always jive with everything, and they also have very unique Persian feasts out there. So, but it's still helpful because it's a very early calendar. Okay, then again, another Melkite source is Vatican Syriac 21, and this one is a complete Melkite Sanctoral calendar. And when I mean complete, I mean that there's for the most part, every day has a saint or feast day for the whole year. Okay, because we're going to see that there's some calendars that don't have that. This was written in it's 11th century. It was written in 1041, and it is part of the Vatican Syriac collection. And if you really are interested, you can log online and look at it. This is just one page that I did a screenshot of for the beginning of the year. But again, this is very helpful, this one and the next one, because we're going to see we have a very important Syriac Maronite calendar that'll be coming up. And that's where I said where sometimes we don't have the full details. This might have extra details, or that document is also notorious for misspellings, and this will help us correct the Syriac spelling of the names, because they're Greek names. So this is basically similar, it's just another source, Vatican Syriac 20. Okay, this one was written in 1215, so this is 13th century. And they're not exactly the same. They vary, those two calendars, on some of their own saints. So, okay, so then we get into the Maronite sources, and this is what I call the Maronite Old Calendar. Okay, because we're going to see that there's a demarcation point between what whom we used to commemorate and who we do now on the Sanctoral calendar. And so sources for this we would consider, although this first one could really go into the comparison one, the Rabula Gospel Lectionary. Okay, everybody knows about the Rabula Gospels, right? Yes. Okay, we have our copy here of one of the pages from it. That's what we think of the Rabula Gospel. We think of the iconography in it, but it was a gospel book. Okay, it was actually a gospel book. And in it, at the beginning, after the artwork, there's some pages that have a list of the different, not only feasts, but the different Sundays when something is to be read. So, so you see how it has these single characters here? Those are numbers in Syriac. So, but they didn't have chapter and verse like we do now in in the Bible. So the way they divided up the gospel was, let's take, for example, Matthew's gospel. Well, the book of the genealogy according to Matthew, of Jesus Christ. That would be section 1. Then when it comes down to part about, Joseph, that would be section 2. That was the section that you read. That was a lectionary. It's not a lectionary like we do now where we take a portion and put another one here. You would actually have to look it up. And so this is the list to tell you, look at section such and such. So like this one says, in John number 1. Okay, section 1 of John's Gospel. So it's not really a calendar per se, but there are some feasts that are listed. Among them is the Nativity of St. John the Baptizer and his beheading, the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul, the Feast of St. Stephen, the first martyr, the Feast of the 40 Martyrs of Sebaste, the Feast of St. Anthony the Great, and the Feast of St. Simeon the Silite.
What's the matter?
Nope. He's not there. Because this was in possession of us, but it really wasn't ours. It wasn't written by us. Yes. Okay. The next source is from the 13th century. Welcome, Father. That's okay. The next source is from the 13th century. It's again a lectionary or riche courrier, and it's often known as the Salamanca manuscript. And like the Rabbula Gospel lectionary, this is not a sanctoral calendar per se, but similarly it has some feasts that are listed. But on the Rabbula one and on this one, they don't really tell you to celebrate it on, like, for example, St. Stephen on December 27th. You're supposed to know that when the Feast of St. Stephen is, and so here's the reading for it. Okay, so it's not very helpful for making sure it's the right day, but here's some of the feasts that are found in that. The Nativity of our Lord Jesus, the Feast of the Praises of the Mother of God, the Feast of St. Stephen, the Feast of the Massacre of the Innocents, the Feast of the Circumcision, the Feast of the Epiphany, the Feast of the Presentation of Jesus in the Temple, the Feast of the 40 Martyrs of Sebaste, the Feast of the Holy Cross, and the Feast of St. George. So notice those 40 Martyrs of Sebaste, how important they are. And they end up being one of the feasts that during Lent that is a sort of a free day, I guess.
March 9th.
Yep, March 9th. Okay, so now we're going to get to one of the first figures that we know. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of him, so I found a picture of his handwriting from one of his documents. His name is Bishop Gabriel Bar Kalai, right? Kalai? I can never pronounce that right. Sure, listen to say it now. I can read Arabic and Syriac, I can't pronounce it very well. Okay, so he was the first Maronite to study in Italy even before the Maronite College in Rome was established. And I'm going to take this information from Bishop Bajani's translation of Pierre Deeb's History of the Maronite Church. Here's the biography of Bar Kalai. The figure which dominates the Maronite history of the 15th century is that of Gabriel ibn al-Kalai. He was born about 1450 in the village of Lefid in the province of Jbail. During his mission to Lebanon, Brother Gryphon chose him with 2 other Maronites to enter the order of St. Francis. After their religious profession at Jerusalem, all 3 went to Venice and Rome to complete their studies. They were the first Maronites sent to the West for studies. Having returned to Lebanon, Brother Gabriel served his people by instructing them and making the faith clear. He battled against the Jacobites and was not afraid to go to Abd al-Monam and to accuse him to his face of having betrayed the religion of his fathers. In the space of 3 years, he wrote 456 letters to unmask the errors of the Monophysites, as he himself says. He excelled in the composition of Zajaliet, did I pronounce that correctly? Which are popular poems. We have some of these specimens. He composed and translated into Arabic many works of theology, history, canon law, etc. In 1507, he was consecrated Bishop of Nicosia for the Maronites of Cyprus and remained in his see until his death in 1516. Ibn al-Qalai was the first Maronite to read the Latin works on the religious origins of his nation. He defended with vigor the perpetual orthodoxy of the Maronites, and his example was followed by later writers. He exercised a profound influence on the life of the Maronite Church. He is considered among the principal precursors of the effective Latinization of the liturgy and discipline. Merci. So, in one of the manuscripts, there is a calendar which they believe is attributed to him. And this is a select Maronite Sanctoral calendar. And what I mean by select is not every day has a commemoration. In fact, each month only has about 6 to 8 commemorations. And it's notable that sometimes the dates are not on the same day as our normal calendar. So there may be a day off or 2 days off, or he may have somebody that's not on other places. So where he took his source, we're not always sure. And he already started introducing some Latin feasts, like I think he may have All Saints on there, but don't quote me yet on that. That's why I'm making a comparison calendar, so I can double check things. But anyways, it's an important early Maronite calendar, and it's really the sort of the first Maronite calendar in some form or another. Okay. Everybody still with me? Okay. Kind of? Okay. You have questions? Okay, the next document is Florence Oriental 436. So this manuscript was composed in 1547 at Rome by Maronite Bishop Simon of Mount Lebanon, and it's a Maronite breviary which contains the anaphora of the 12 apostles and an index of the Davidic Psalms and prophets for use in the divine office. Do you hear that saying? The prophets' use in the divine office, because of readings. So we were having a discussion the other day whether there were supposed to be readings in the divine office or not. Scriptural readings, yeah. So there is a calendar in here. Again, it's a select calendar. It's very short. It doesn't have for every single day, but it's a very early one. And so you can see here some of the saints here. All right, now we get to the one of the more important ones. This is Vatican Syriac 313. This is the first complete, and I'm putting that in quotes, Maronite Sanctoral calendar. It's complete because, like I said before, it would have every day a saint for each month. However, it's at the end of a manuscript, and it's missing half of August and all of September. Those disappeared someplace.
Sum it off.
Sum it off. Yeah. Vacation. But this manuscript was composed in 1564 or 1565, depending on how you read the Alexandrian date. So it's a very early manuscript, and a detailed study was done by Jean-Marie Saget, and I will butcher the French if I try and say this, so I'm going to translate it. The Maronite Calendar of Manuscript, Syriac Manuscript 313. And he has used other sources to try and identify, but as I mentioned, this is the one that has a lot of misspellings. And then some are so bad you just can't even figure out who this is supposed to be that's being commemorated. But in general, we got a pretty good list of saints for each of the years. But unfortunately, his study left off because the manuscript didn't have for August and half of August and September, so he didn't do anything further. But in doing some research, I found another manuscript of basically the same calendar. It's a little bit later. This one was written in 1613, but it is complete. It's a complete Maronite Sanctoral calendar, with a couple of days that are just have no commemoration at all for whatever reason. But this is part of a manuscript of the Maronite Shimto Rapto, which is the big Shimto, and kind of stuck in the middle is this calendar, and so this will be helpful for filling in those months, but also occasionally there's some little differences in like the spelling of the saints or things like that, so it helps to try and help identify again some of the various saints. And this particular manuscript is in Rome at the Mariamini in their library. Then the next source that we have is from the 17th century, the Maronite Divine Office of 1624. And this calendar is similar to Vatican 313 and the other one, the Mariamini one. There's a couple of differences here and there, but what's interesting is where they couldn't figure out who on those other calendars, those saints that I was talking about, they left them blank. So we have these gaps here and there because they're like, we can't figure it out either. So, but it does again help in trying to figure out some of the saints. And then they do have a few other places where they added things too. So, and this is the first printed edition of the Maronite Divine Office, of the Maronite Sanctoral Cyble. And so it's very important source for many reasons. Okay, the next here is we get to Patriarch Dwight. Everybody knows Patriarch Dwight, right? Yeah. So he lived, or he died in 1704, and even though I know you know about him, I want to read this passage from Deeb's History of the Maronite Church. Born in Ehden on August the 2nd, 1630, Dwight was sent in 1641 to the College of Rome by Patriarch Amira. During his stay in Rome, Dwight made a research into all of the documents relative to his people. He discovered a large number, especially in the library of the Maronite College, which was then rich in manuscripts. In 1655, he left Rome and returned to Lebanon. On March 25th of the following year, he received priesthood from the patriarch himself. After having given evidence of his talent, tact, and zeal, he was designated by the patriarch to be Bishop of Nicosia and consecrated on July 8, 1668. During his pastoral tours in Lebanon and Cyprus, always searching for new documents, the Bishop of Nicosia had the good fortune to discover numerous manuscripts which served him in his historical works. He succeeded as patriarch on May 20th, 1670. One marvels at his scientific and literary work. In examining his numerous works, one asks how he surmounted all the obstacles to leave to posterity such intellectual riches. It is to him that the Maronite Church owes the formulation of its history and the explanation of its liturgy. On May 3rd, 1704, Dwight died at the monastery of Canobin at the age of 74. So he's a very important figure, obviously, in our church. And so you might not be surprised that he has a calendar. But it's sort of a unique calendar because it's only a couple of pages long. It is included in one of his works on the Rish Kohle, which is basically the music book where he examines all the various tunes for the hymns. So he'll describe, we find Shiho Naturelaito in this, and how many, what the syllabic meter should be. He describes all this. Then he has this list. And this list was not really, I think, meant to be a calendar, but rather it is a list of all the feasts of the saints which have their own proper offices in the Maronite divine office. So not every saint is being listed here that's being commemorated, but only those who have their own proper office. But he does give the dates of when they are to be commemorated and their name. So it's helpful for that. So it shows at least these are certainly very important Maronite ones because we have special prayers for them. So it's basically a select manuscript, a calendar. And then we have these two, in the 18th century, we have these two Maronite missals of 1716 and 1762. They're printed editions of the missals, and they're nearly identical. The 1762 is basically like a reprint of the 1716, but they also have calendars in them, and the calendars, though, that are in these are more or less the one from that 1624 Divine Office with a few tweaks. Okay? And this, the 1716 Maronite Missal was printed at Rome under the supervision of André Skandar, who introduced numerous Latinizations to the Maronite Missal. Next, we have this interesting calendar from the Maronite Sacerdotal of 1752. Well, this document itself is, just beyond the calendar, the document itself is interesting. So, the Maronite Sacerdotal of 1752 is a ritual book containing rituals for baptism, chrismation, communion, confession, anointing of the sick, betrothal, marriage, etc. But it's extremely Latinized. And as Chorbishop Michel Ragy, in his commentary on the Maronite ritual, said, all of the ceremonies and prayers, except in large part those of marriage, were translated quite literally from the Roman ritual into Arabic. The apparent modifications to the Latin text are insignificant. And then after describing the sacerdotal, Ragy notes, as we can see, the sacerdotal of the Maronite Church is a grand attempt one might say, to introduce the Latin rite on the largest possible scale into the administration of the sacraments among the Maronites. With regard to the Maronite Sanctoral calendar that's found in it, though, it's in some ways an abridged version of the one from the 1642 Divine Office, but yet it has some new additions, both Eastern and Western saints, and so it sort of is standing in between the old calendar and when we're going to get now to the Reformed calendar. But what's interesting about this sacerdotal is it was prepared in Rome by the Jesuit fathers, and it was published without the proper Maronite authorities. Sound familiar? And was outlined as outlined in the Synod of Mount Lebanon, and so it was rejected by the Maronite, two of the Maronite patriarchs that followed after it. Now we get to the Reformed period. When I talk about the Reformed, we're going to see that's essentially what we now have when we look on our calendar in these days. So there's a number of sources here. So prior to Germanus Farhat, who's going to have a big influence in the Reform, there were some Maronite Synaxarians that existed. And these are believed to be the source for Germanus Farhat's Synaxarion. There's one from 1652 that was the work of some of the graduates of the Maronite College. There's another one from 1660, which was the work of the graduates of the Maronite College. And then there is one that's the Maronite Synaxarion of Vatican Syriac 243. And this was written by a certain Rizet under the supervision of a Bishop Gabriel Blauza, Bishop of Aleppo. And it's believed that this was the manuscript that Farhat most likely used, and it resides in the Vatican Library right now. Now, I tried to get a copy of this. I applied online, and it said it was going to take 6 weeks for them to get back to me. And then I waited and I waited and I waited. And I finally logged back in, and they said, your order has been canceled. I don't know why it was canceled. So I'm still trying to get a copy of this document, because it would be interesting to compare it, because as Michel Hayek in his book on the Maronite liturgy says about this Synaxarion, its calendar corresponds point by point to that of our current missal. Farhat must have used this text, or one similar to it, to establish his calendar and assign scriptural readings to each of its days. So notice, not only is he doing the saints, but he's also giving the readings for the saints. It was under the patriarchate of Joseph Tien that Farhat's work was adopted. The first edition of the Missal of Koshaya in 1816, as well as all the other editions which followed it until today, well, into his day, imposed it definitively on the community. So you can see where Farhat's work is going to be so important. So this is, I did find a picture of Germanus Farhat, and does anybody really know about him? Anything about him? Okay, so he died in 1732, and he was born on November 20th, 1670, to a wealthy Maronite family in Aleppo, Syria. Farhat was a poet, monk, teacher, grammarian, lexicographer, bishop, and a translator of Syriac and Latin texts into Arabic. Farhat was part of the Arabization and Latinization movements in the 17th and 18th centuries. So it's thanks to him that we've lost our Syriac tradition.
He's founder of the monks.
Huh?
One of the founders.
Yes. In addition to having composed Arabic grammar and dictionary books, Farhat also translated many of the classic Latin works into Arabic. Regarding his work on the Maronite Synaxarion, it appears that Farhat incorporated many non-Maronite sources into his Synaxarion. And I'm saying his Synaxarion because he's basically creating something new. He had previously translated many of these sources into Arabic for the first time, including and especially the Paradise of the Holy Fathers. Yesterday, the professor, she mentioned that as one of the sources that was in the Syriac tradition about the monks, the lives of the monks. So this is a page from the 1724 Farhat Synaxarion that's in at Kaslik University. It's available online if you want to check it out. And thanks to our seminary here, and thank you, Vincent, for doing all the scanning. We actually have from Bishop Dwight's collection, also from 1724, same year, a Farhat Synaxarion. And it's been digitized, and so I'm going to do a comparison and see if they're exactly the same or if there's differences. Because I've noticed that there are actually two recensions of this. There's a longer and a shorter form of the Farhat Synaxarion. The longer one will have maybe like 3 entries, like 3 different saints on a day, unless it's like a major feast, then it may just have one. But the shorter one will have maybe just 1 or 2. So some saints got kind of left off. So I'm trying to use the longer form for my comparison calendar. But it seems like that he also composed in Arabic a gospel and epistle book for use in the Divine Liturgy. And it's this Synaxarion that becomes the source for our current Maronite calendar, more or less. Okay, so as I said, he used different sources in it. And what I mean by that, he took some of our Eastern feast saints, and most of those are on the correct feast. But occasionally he would substitute one of our saints for a Latin saint, but he didn't always use the Latin saint's actual feast day, because maybe we had somebody on that day, so he had a blank somewhere else, so he just stuck them in. But he also added many of the Desert Fathers because remember, he translated these works into Arabic from Syriac or Latin texts into Arabic. So he took these works that he had translated of the different fathers, the Desert Fathers, and he incorporated them into the Synaxarions. Remember, the Synaxarion is a little short life of a saint. So he took a little snippet from this Desert Father and from this one, so we get a lot of Egyptian Desert Fathers in there. And one of the sources, it has to be from this Paradise of the Holy Fathers, which is from the 7th century, because he adds somebody that's mentioned in this book who they sound very saintly, but in my research, I think he's on our calendar now, but I'm pretty sure he should be removed because he's at best heterodox, if not a heretic. So this is something that needs to be addressed down the road. Another source that Farhat would have used is the Roman Martyrology. Now, this is a page from the 1583 edition. I don't know which one he used, but what's interesting is the 1673 edition, which was promulgated by Pope Clement X, included a new saint, Pope St. Leo III, who's not in Farhat's edition. So obviously he must have used an edition earlier than that particular edition, but which one I don't know exactly. And as I said, sometimes it just seems like there's no rhyme or reason why some of the saints are being commemorated on certain days. He just plopped them in where he could. Okay. Now, we heard earlier about the 1816 missal, which was the first one that was printed at Koshaia. I'm still trying to get a copy of that, so I don't have a picture of it, but everybody that's probably visited Koshaia, St. Anthony's, has seen this printing press in the museum, so that's the best picture I could get of it. It was probably printed on that printing press, you know. We can imagine, or something like it. So according to Michel Hayek, regarding the 1816 Maronite Missal, he said, the texts here are those of the last Roman edition. Same layout, same number of anaphore, same rubrics, although literally improved, same forms of blessings, same truncated calendar, and somewhat marked by the Roman Sanctoral. The strangest thing is that we continue to establish at the beginning of the missals this incomplete nomenclature of saints, when it did not agree at all with that which we find in the body of the text. In front of the different evangelical pericopes that we have provided for each day of the year, this calendar, as well as the translation of the various scriptural readings, are the work of Farhat. So Farhat's work is still showing up now in the 1816 missal. Remember, he died by that time. Don't worry, I'm getting close. We're in the 19th and 20th centuries. So these are a couple of other missals. This is an 1888 Maronite missal, and this is the 1908. Now, see how the difference here? Initially, when I was doing my comparison calendar, I was using this format from the 1908, which has a list of saints. And I was like, oh, we don't have saints for every day. Then I looked a little further, so now I got to fill in blanks too. That actually almost every day does have a saint, including the citation of what the reading is to be for the epistle and the gospel for each saint. So maybe we can add that to our desk calendar. Add some more reading. Subdeacon, you up to typing? So these are basically, I imagine from the description of Hayek that these are like the 1816 edition, but until I can compare it, take that with a grain of salt. Okay, now we get to the first edition of the Synaxarion done at Kaslik by Father Paul Daher. And Daher? Daher, not Daher. Daher. Daher.
Yes.
Daher, right? Daher. Okay. Okay. I'll try not to curse. Okay. Anyways, this was the first that I could recognize, the first complete revision of the Synaxarion from the time of Farhat. Now, he's not reinventing the will per se. He's taking the list of saints from Farhat, but the entries of like the lives, he's doing more modern research. But he did remove many of those Egyptian fathers. Unfortunately, he didn't remove the one I think needs to be removed. And it's the first time this is being written in Arabic script, no longer Karshuni, because those other documents were in Karshuni. Everybody know what Karshuni is? It's Arabic but written with Syriac characters. So you read the Syriac, but you pronounce, it comes out as Arabic. Okay, so now we're actually using,
Phonetic in some ways.
it's like phonetics.
Like
Yeah.
phonetics, yeah. Oh, interesting.
Now we're actually, now it's being actually written in Arabic for the Arabic speaking people. And obviously he added some Eastern and Western saints who had been canonized since the time of the Farhat Synaxarion, but otherwise it's very close. And then since then there's been updated editions, like I mentioned, Monsignor George gave me the 1996 one. There's been dates, as I found, 74, 86, 88, 96, 98, 2002, 2004, and 2010 updates. I guess because John Paul II kept canonizing people, we had to add more people. So here's the 1996 edition. And then in 2015, as I mentioned, this heavy one here, it must have cost you a fortune for luggage, saying it, coming back from Lebanon, was published in 2015 by Father Najim Shahwan. And it's another revision of the Maronite Synaxarion, written in Arabic. They put little icons of the saints near the entries. And in the introduction, Shahwan states that he used Dahr's work, but he made a complete review of it, making adjustments and additions where needed. I did compare. There's sometimes, though, it's exactly the same. He didn't change anything. So it must be like...
But he added at the end the Sundays of the liturgical year.
Yeah, so there's some things... there's some... It's the latest one if you want something in Arabic. Yes.
Are any of these translated in English or not?
No, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay. I'm getting there. I'm a couple more pages.
Oh,
Bear with me.
sorry.
Bear with me.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I noticed that our calendar, eparchy calendar, had all these blanks. So I started finding a list for Buquerque, and then Bishop Gregory was generous enough to send me the little pocket desk calendar, or whatever you want to call it, from the Patriarchal Liturgical Commission. And this contains the official list of the saints to be commemorated by the Maronite Church. And it's basically a modern version of the calendar that was found in the 1816, 1888, and 1908 Maronite missals. So therefore, it's basically a modern version of the Farhat Synaxarion. So you see the demarcation point. Farhat is the demarcation point of the Reformed Maronite calendar from the old Maronite calendar. The saints don't always jive. We have sometimes completely different saints in the list. And then from that, we got this. Okay? So Bishop Gregory was kind enough to listen to my plea. Can we please add more saints to the calendar? He goes, well, we'll need a list. I said, I'm working on it. So we did. And
No, to be clear, though,
yes.
we didn't add any saints. We just
No.
updated from this.
Yes,
That's the
it's
official.
yeah, we didn't add. I meant like to put them on, I guess, because they weren't being lit. But I think for many years Buquerque was not. Yeah, but even though there was an official list, Buquerque in its calendar was not publishing them either. So we were just putting on what they gave us, which was like a third of the saints.
But then they made a conscious decision to add these saints, and I'm not
Yes.
sure what year.
No, I don't know either, but we'd have to go back and see how many old ones don't have it or whatever. But we do have them now. The list goes back though.
They didn't give it to us, remember?
If I can just
Yeah,
say-
yeah. Go ahead, Sid.
So this calendar is the official from the Patriarch with all the saints that we're supposed to commemorate in our calendars. All we did was translate it. Even we translated the mistakes,
Yes.
which was unfortunate for us. But Father Claude, God bless him, he would give me a list of the mistakes and I'd send them to the liturgical commission. They said, oh yes, we'll discuss it. But then we find out that they're the same mistakes we made the following year. So it's not a perfect plan. But there was, in the last 4 or 5 years, there was a time in which at least 100 new saints were added to this list. And what happened is, at our monastery, the monk who did all that typing put it on his own program that he created for GM years ago. God rest him in peace, he died. And then the other monks were not able to follow it up. That's where Subdeacon Norbert came in, and he figured out how to do that so that we could put it in our own calendar. So that's why in the last 2 years or so we caught up to Kirki, and we added these 100 saints. Now we just need to know who these people are.
Which is getting me to my last couple of pages here. Okay. So, yeah. So what's next? Well, for me, I want to finish my comparison chart because I think it's going to be helpful for historic purposes, if nothing else. And I want to, basically this talk will become an introduction to, of what the sources are, and then when I publish it, you'll get a chart like this with notes about all the saints and everything. Okay?
That's beautiful.
It'll be a few years probably out, because I got to find the time to do it, but I try and work on it here and there. What else needs to be done? I'm not going to try and disparage anyone. Anybody have this?
Yeah,
Lots of mistakes.
lots of them.
Okay, you can say it. Yes, there's a lot of grammatical mistakes. I'm going to speak frankly, but not in a disparaging way. For right now, this is the best thing you're going to get in English because it's the only thing in English. Okay, I use it every. One second, Subdeacon. I use it every day, as I mentioned, for daily liturgy. I read who the saints. Now, part of the problem is some of the saints that are listed on here are not the ones that are on our calendar, and vice versa. So some days I'm like, well, on our calendar is Saint so and so, but let's read about Saint this person, and we'll commemorate both of them or whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't recognize the cover. Could you tell me the title and what it is?
The Maronite Synaxarion according to the rite of the Antiochian Maronite Church, compiled and translated in part by Hosea Apiki. Yes.
Norbert, if you remind me, I'll give you a copy.
Thank you.
So this is a layman who did all this work. He lives up in Tupper Lake. His name is Hosea Akiki. His son now...
San Diego.
Yes.
Son is San Diego.
Yeah, and one in Watervliet. A very nice man. But what he did, he took little bits from Butler's Lives of the Saints. He took some things from internet, some things from Farhat, some things, but he never footnoted it. So I sent this to our monastery in Petersham. They went through the whole thing. They made several suggestions. I asked them if they would make all that. They said it's too much work. Plus, we cannot do a synaxarion. Why? Because we don't know the sources where he took these from. So that leads us to this. And excuse me 1 second, I'm going to steal your thunder, but I want to thank Father Claude for taking on this project. This is how he did the Rite of the Lamp. When he did his license in theology, he took all the editions of the Rite of the Lamp all the way through history. He compared them and found which ones were the most authentic, and that's where you got, Bishop Gregory, snipped from the 7 stations. Instead of a whole liturgy of the word, it used to be 7 liturgies of the word with epistle and a gospel, right? But we asked him if you do epistle, gospel, and a few prayers and hymns, and then we did those 7 stations because otherwise it would be way too long. But he took it in a scientific way. He took all of those 7 stations from 7, 8, 10 different manuscripts, and he looked at them scientifically. And that's why we got the best of the best. Now he's doing that for the saints. So for the first time ever, if God gives you the grace to do this work, we will have a full careful look back at all the sanctoral cycles of the Maronite Church. And then we can perhaps propose some things to Kirki to make the calendar even better. So, thanks.
Thank you, Sayedna. No pressure, but yes, that is part of the plan. And I know Sayedna has also been on me to, he goes, you need to do a new Maronite Synaxarion. That's a lot of work.
Yes.
It's a very much lot of work. And I don't mind helping with it, but to compose it straight out from the beginning, that's a lifetime work almost. Or, you know, it's going to take a good amount of time. Which is why I'd like to propose to others. This is probably going to be the closest thing right now to matching up the official calendar, maybe with a few exceptions. My Arabic is not that great. Somebody that wants to translate from Arabic into English, the work is done from a scholarly point of view, because it's Dahr's work and Dahr's work and Shahwan. So it's a matter of making it into understandable English. That might be the easiest way to go about it, at least initially, rather than reinventing the wheel. And then we could always, make changes here and there, but that needs to be done. Other things that still need to be done is a comparison between that the 1724 Farhat Synaxarion and that Vatican manuscript, and to also try and identify Farhat's sources. Maybe one of the seminarians wants to get a doctorate one of these days. You know what would be a great doctorate program? Translate the Karshuni Farhat Synaxarion. It does not exist in French, English, I don't even think it's been translated into Arabic from the Karshuni, like in Arabic script. Somebody wants to do that and then do a serious study of where did he draw his sources. These are things that need to be done with regard to the calendar. These are not all the things I'm going to do. I'm just saying what's next that needs to be done. We got to go through and methodically look at the saints that are on the official calendar. Like today I mentioned, where there's the misspelling. Those are simple things that could be corrected. Yesterday, though, we got Simon, or Simeon, and there's three possibilities who it could be. And depending on which calendar you look on, they give different titles. Brother of the Lord is only in the more modern ones. He's sometimes known as Simon, son of Alphaeus, Simon, son of Joseph the carpenter, because he was I guess he's a brother of the Lord in a real sense like that, you know. Of course, that's a whole other discussion about things. But I'm just saying, these are things that need to be really seriously studied instead of slapping titles on the calendar. We put on, like, one thing that bothers me is we put on our calendar for the Feast of Saint Marina, nun of Canobin. She was not a nun. She was a monk. She lived as a monk. It is whitewashing our history. It destroys the whole story. The whole story is that she lived as a monk, and in fact there's a dialogue hymn between her and Satan in the Syriac tradition, in which Satan says, just reveal yourself, everything will be you'll be not guilty. And she fights and says, you will not deceive me like you deceived my mother Eve. I am not weak like you think women are weak. That's what they go back and forth.
And she said,
Yes.
she's
grown accustomed to this way
Yes.
of life, this way of prayerful life.
Right.
She doesn't want to lose it if she reveals it.
Right. But when we change little titles like that, which I usually call them in my notes epitaphs, these little epitaphs, it may sound like a minor thing, but it's not minor. It changes the whole story, the whole. I don't know what we're embarrassed about. Yes, Edna.
I think we translate, maybe it's a good idea to see which one should we translate and which one should be. If we want to modify it and edit it, I think this would be the proper way. And I think based on that, yes, we could go to those sources beyond, hagiography,
Yeah.
something, and write them and translate them and edit. Some of it sometimes you could tell is like, if somebody belongs to Maronite religious order or something, or
Yeah.
the Periogena was there. Come on, what's this has to do with something with Synaxarian?
Sure.
Certain
And
things that could be taken out.
and some of them become longer than what the whole idea of a Synaxarian. Synaxarian is supposed to be a short life. Here's the basic things.
Like Rafa is 4 pages.
Yeah, Rafka will be 4 pages, and then somebody else you get like 2 lines. So
I do it every day. That's why I know what I'm talking.
okay.
Marina Panavi was July 17th?
July
No.
7th, 16, 15, something like that.
What does it say in Arabic?
It says Rahbat.
Does it say that? It says,
No, just says.
It might just say-
Rahiba.
Rahiba. So none of Canabine.
Yeah.
So,
But in the Synaxarian, they explained to it.
Yeah, but-
She acted, but
but
in
what
the
the point that I'm
title is
trying-
different.
The point is really.
The point that we're trying to make, it's an important distinction. You make a good point. But when we get something as an official document from the patriarch, we don't have the freedom to change that from
I understand. but
nun
their
to
position-
monk.
Yeah, I
So,
understand.
but that's the official.
But understand that I think I try to understand the reasoning. I'm not. They think because if they say monk, she's in her sexuality, she was a woman. In the story developing that, they need to explain the process and what.
But that's where it's the job of the priest to educate. I mean, the patriarchs were buried there. Many of them. Patriarch Dawaihes was buried there. We have the cave there. There is a great devotion for this.
The patriarch goes twice to Anubin to say mass.
Yeah.
The feast of San Marina and the vigil of the Assumption.
It's as if we're afraid to admit part of our truth. She's not the only one that did this. There are a number of saints female saints that
Actually,
dressed
there
up
is a
as
movie
men.
about her now.
Yeah.
Recently, they put the movie.
So that's. These are just some of the things, but
So could the suggestion be sent back to our patriarch and then we can?
Yes.
Wasn't that? I think that was one.
well, no, I put it on there. You weren't in favor of it, Sayed.
Oh, okay.
Did I convince you?
Sayed,
Yeah,
can we
finally.
convince you that?
Yes, I will next time.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. The next thing that I would like to do is publish an article on what I call the curious case of Synesius of Cyrene. And this is the one I said that I think it is at best heterodox, if not a heretic. I did send to the Patriarchal Liturgical Commission a 10-page examination of it, which I had sent to Sayedna, and of course they didn't say anything back. I got ignored. So, but I'd like to publish a serious
the
study.
signature of the bishop, then it won't be. I think if you sign
Well,
it. Or cover letter.
You have more faith than I have.
either way, I'd like to
But at
publish
least
a serious study about that. It needs to be done.
Signed by 2 bishops,
Yeah.
it will make a
And-
bigger stand.
And finally, I just want to, and then if you have further questions, but I just want to get through my thing here because I probably went way long here.
Why do you
Sorry to
think
bore you
he's
guys.
heretic? Why do you think that?
Because he didn't accept the resurrection of the body, which is a big tenet of Christianity, among other things. Read the article when I publish it.
There you go.
Oh,
See,
okay.
there was-
All right. Well, just one last thing here. Okay. So in light of these things that, especially that need to be done for to examine the sanctoral calendar, like Synesius of Cyrene, the errors, nun versus monk, all that stuff. The Synod of Mount Lebanon in 1736 ordered, with regard to the veneration of the saints, they ordered, and it's almost 300 years now, and we still haven't followed through on this order. Quote, "It is the duty to bring out the true and to reject the false. Also, his beatitude, the patriarch, must choose wise scholars to examine the martyrology." Now, here they're using martyrology because this is written from the Latins to us, so when they say martyrology, they mean what? The Synaxarion, right? So the patriarch must choose wise scholars to examine the martyrology of our church in order to remove the uncertain accounts and to write the confirmed accounts. It is up to them, the scholars, to add the names of the newly proclaimed saints by the Roman pontiffs. After completing this, the martyrology will be presented to his beatitude, the patriarch, so that he may confirm it and give the permission to read it in the churches. The Farhat Synaxarion never was properly promulgated. It was written before the Synod of Mount Lebanon. The Dahar one, the Shahwan one, to my knowledge, I don't think they have the official stamp of approval. So
in Kirkis, they read it whenever we have.
they may read it, but it's
Sometimes,
but it's never none of. So
Correct.
from for almost 300 years, we have not done this order from the Synod of Mount Lebanon regarding the veneration of the saints.
Correct.
And I will mic drop on that one.
We're optimistic, right?
Anything else?
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I missed the first half of your talk.
It was the same.
So, and I am happy and glad, I have to be honest, I'm glad and happy that you're doing this work and not I. You know, I would have lost more hair than ever. So, thank you for your wonderful talk. We open it up for questions and discussions. It looks like somebody back, and I can't see that far, wants to ask a question. Father George.
Thank you, Father God, for the great presentation. Hopefully, we have more material for the devotions. You said that to be back in the churches. The last sentence you said,
Yeah.
When and is it a reading in the church during the liturgy? When would these readings be done?
Well, because obviously, if Farhat was the first one to write one that was even there. Like I said, there was like a couple of manuscripts before that, but we're talking 18th century. We did not have a Synaxarion before that, so it was not part of our tradition to read it during the divine office like we do now for Ramsho or whatever, or per se at the liturgy. Yeah, So what they mean by that, I don't know precisely. I would say you use your pastoral judgment. Like I do, like I said, before liturgy on a weekday, I don't give a homily on the weekdays. But before the liturgy, because I know we're going to celebrate Saint so-and-so today, and most, like Satan said, we don't know who these people are. I read about them so that when they get commemorated in the diptychs of the liturgy, at least if they don't remember them tomorrow, at least for that day, they remember something about that person. So that's how I do it pastorally. But I don't think there was any precise place to do it. I mean, I guess you could substitute it as a homily if you're, especially on a feast of a major saint, if you're celebrating on the weekend. You could just read it, and then that'll be quick and short, and the people will be very happy.
Why are there so many differences between the Roman Synaxarion and like our calendar? I mean, there's like I'm trying to think of some, St. Jude is different. And,
That's all, I mean, I'd have to look at an individual case like that, but, my initial, I'm pretty 90% sure it's gonna go back to Farhat, because, like I said, he'd arbitrarily often would pick a day, because maybe we had somebody else on that day or something like that. For example, I,
St. Blaise is not on our calendar, I don't know why. St. Blaise.
he's on the old calendar.
Yeah, St. Blaise,
yeah.
famous St. Blaise, the.
But his day for us was not on February the 2nd.
Yeah.
It's on even on the old calendar.
For example, the Orthodox, they have some Maron feast day.
On February the 14th.
You know, I'm giving an example, you know.
On February
But
14th.
actually, correct me or not, I think certain time, also in the Roman calendar, certain countries, they have their own addition to certain days, correct me or not, sometimes for their own.
Well, yeah, we all do that to
in
some.
addition, you know,
Yeah.
but it's in general.
I think you're right, in the Latin calendar.
Right,
In
but
the Latin canon, it's not universal, it's everyone. They have certain universality, but I think each country,
yeah.
they add a few saints. If I'm not
Well,
mistaken, I
right.
could be wrong, but
Even
I think-
among our own calendars, there's sometimes variation. A lot of the stuff, unless it's like a real very old feast, those tend to be consistent across not only our calendars but everybody's calendars, east and west, because they're so old. But you know, say you borrow a saint from either from Rome or from the Greek tradition, but you already have a Syriac saint that you've been commemorating for 5 centuries. You're not going to supplant that. Well, nowadays we do, unfortunately, but traditionally you wouldn't have supplanted them. You would say, all right, we'll move the Greek guy the next day or whatever.
several of ours are like that. It
Yes,
might be like
yes,
the
but
next day
again,
or
that goes back to
something.
Farhat.
That's
That goes
Farhat.
back. A lot of that goes
But
back
you
to
could
Farhat.
have 2, 3, you know.
Yeah, you can have.
For example, Saint
Different
Benedict.
colors.
I know because for Father Boniface, one day about a couple years ago, I sent him, happy feast day for your
Yes.
for the Benedictines, and he goes, "It's not our feast day." I said, "Well, it is on our calendar." He said, "Well," he goes, "the Roman Church typically celebrates it on such and such day." He goes, "But that's the new one." He goes, "We as Benedictines celebrated. We celebrated it 2 days ago." And so I start looking, and I guess
Nothing's universal.
Farhat, I forget, I think there was somebody on that day, so he must have said, oh, 2 days later, well, it's close enough. I mean,
That is true.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, that is true because you have St. Francis and St. Teresa the Little Flower
Yeah,
in October. And we've had to change them because of needs in Lebanon, so we don't have them on the same date as the Latin Church. Same thing with St. Charbel. St. Charbel was placed on July 24th. For us, it's July 23rd.
yeah.
But they probably had a saint on July 23rd, and they moved him to July 24th.
yeah, they have
That's
Catherine,
the other one.
somebody, or
Yeah.
it's some important saint from them. So they're like, well, we're going to borrow Charbel, but we're going to move him a day because he doesn't take his precedent. And then, of course, in Lebanon, we don't even celebrate him usually on the 23rd. They do it on what? The 3rd Sunday of July. Yes, Abuna.
This is just a point of information. In your opinion, what is the value of mentioning just the name of the saint without knowing anything about the background of the saint?
Well,
We're obliged to
Yeah.
do that.
yeah.
That's what he does.
We
Yeah,
are
but
obliged
what's-
to do that.
We should commemorate the saints, even if we don't know them. But God knows who they are. God knows, and we're asking their intercession for whatever. Now, ideally, yes, we should know, which is why it's important that we do have like a synaxarian type thing, so that the faithful can know more about these saints, because they're supposed to inspire our lives for sure.
For example, in the States, for example,
Yeah.
we have our own Maronite, but maybe because for the sake of our people, maybe we need to add Mother Cabrini. We need to add a few things that are American
In our
in some way.
calendar, we did.
You know, and
Yes.
in some ways
Yeah,
they are
so
American
that's-
because our people also associate with something like that. We have to be.
Bishop Zaidan makes a good point. So we decided for our liturgical calendar in the United States, we would add all the American saints. That was a conscious decision that we made because we're living in the United States. So our calendar wouldn't be the same for the English-speaking Maronite communities in Australia or England.
Yes, Deacon.
One question. The reading that we currently have for the saints, some of the saints that we have a reading associated, where those readings came from? What?
Mubarak.
Saint Mubarak.
Yeah. No, I honestly I don't know. I mean, they come from Bukirky, but I don't know where they're getting it from. Now, because I haven't gotten that far into the research, because I just discovered, as I said, that I was using the wrong list from some of those old missals, and now I have a source for the readings. So now what I want to do is compare and see, do the ones that we do have, do they match the old missal readings, or are they different? And with Sayedna's permission, I'd like to, and Norbert's help, I'd like to add for the, on the, not obviously not on the photo calendar, but on the deaths calendar, to add the readings for every of the saints, because maybe you want to use those instead of like the Tuesday of the 18th week of Pentecost, you know?
I think part of choosing the reading, in some way, if I want to use arbitrary, but what they do, they look into the life of that saint. They look which one fits. If there is special verse from the Bible that inspired that saint, they'll put it. And that's why they chose those readings. It's nothing, creativity of the church.
Yes, but the question...
Saint Anthony is great, because he heard about this, go and sell everything. That's the gospel came. They're inspired by the life of the saints, and that's the way it came.
But the question is whether the modern ones are the Farhat ones, or are they a modern one? You know,
It's modern. I think
probably. I mean, knowing like how they do everything
because
else.
in the old days, the 10 versions, the wise and foolish versions was in all the saints of women saints, almost. That gospel was probably read 30 times a year, 40 times a year. I'm giving I remember it. I remember that before. Because I used to serve for one priest who was almost blind. That gospel, he remembered it by he would say it all together all the time.
Maybe that's why you heard it so much.
I'm giving you an example because this is the gospel was for any version, feast day, this is the gospel was. And this is a variety.
Bishop, when I was ordained in the priesthood, the missal had the gospel for any virgin, and I was very happy about that because my Arabic was okay, but I got to read it so many times I knew it off by heart.
Okay. Going once.
Do you know who Marshallita would be in English?
Marshallita, yeah, it's Saint. That one has so dear to my heart. My dog is named Shalita.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because he's the patron saint of animals from our tradition.
Talking about St. Francis,
yes.
Marshallita came to my head, and I'm like, what's his name?
Although I've never found the reason why he's the patron saint of animals.
And that was
for us.
going to be my second.
Well, I just no idea. I've never found a source for it. But Saint Artemius, first, of all, he was a.
So it's Artemius.
Patron of
animals. Yeah,
like St. Francis.
But his story has nothing to do with animals at all. He was a commander of the sort of a commander / governor of the upper part of Egypt, who eventually became a martyr. But he was one of the soldier martyrs, and because he wouldn't renounce his faith for the emperor. But his name Shalita is from the Syriac word meaning for power or authority. which is because he was in charge of like a governorship. He was in charge of an area. So he was a Shalita,
Like a squadron.
like a squadron leader or something. So he lost his real Greek name in the Syriac tradition and became known by his epitaph. And we have a few saints like that. Like we have Saint Asio, which means doctor or physician, who is Saint Pantaleon in the Greek tradition. Okay. Okay. It's not Asia, it's Asia. It's really, in our pronunciation, it's Asio. We have a few saints like that where they lost their original name. And like that Alexis, the man of God, he's known in our tradition as Risha, or Risho, head. Now, I'm not sure why the head part, but, Oh, Saint Shina, Shino, which means it doesn't really mean it means like tranquility. In fact, in our liturgy, we keep translating it as security. It shouldn't be security. It should be peace and tranquility. It can be security, and in fact, in his case, it probably should be translated with it because he was a robber. He was trying to rob the nuns, and they washed his feet when he entered in with his band of thugs. And one of the nuns drank the dirty water and anointed herself with it, and she was healed of her illness. And because of this, he decided to reveal himself that he was going to rob them and kill them, and he vowed protection to them. And so his name, protection, or Shino.
Is that the name Shiner here in
At China,
I don't know. Maybe. But with
there is Shaina family in Lebanon.
Yeah.
There is Shaina. Abuna Shaina, he was a hermit.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we have a number of saints, and Shalita is just one of those that they lost their original Greek names, and they're known by their epitaphs, I guess you'd say. So.
Thank you.
All right.